special hello to everyone in the 19 countries and 35 states of these United States that have listened to the podcast so far. This is Kevin Pinnell, host of the Between the Slides podcast, with episode 22, Key Elements of the Project Charter. So we're switching off kind of a drive on the incident management, incident command system back into some project management here. Recently, there's some more resources. I've updated my website at betweentheslides.com and categorized previous episodes into incident management, education, some general categories, project management. So hopefully that helps folks navigate the website at betweentheslides.com. And remember, we're on Instagram at PSC2PMP and Facebook at PSC2PMP as well. So one thing I want to start with is, what is a charter? What's the history of the charter? According to Merriam-Webster, it's from the 13th century and is a written instrument or contract executed in due form. So if we think about that, and I've got a couple other examples of the modern charter, whether you're doing it for Six Sigma, an Agile project, Waterfall, it is in fact a contract, right? We get them signed. It is binding. It authorizes the project. And you know, it's a very kind of official step that we take to prepare this. And we'll go through why I think that is and why we all should know that is, really. 2A of the definition of a charter from Merriam-Webster is a grant or guarantee of rights, franchises, or privileges from the sovereign power of a state or country. So if we break that down into project terms, so the sovereign, let's say our sponsor, right, or executive sponsor, if that's the term you use for your projects, is who's going to authorize the power of the state or the organization, right, or vendor coming in, or country, so our company, so who has the purse strings, who brought this in. So it's very much in line, the old definition of it that we use today. And 4 under the Merriam-Webster instrument, or rather definition of a charter, kind of the fourth one in the list that's in the online definition I found, is a special privilege, immunity, or exception. So when we think about granting rights to project team members, particularly project managers, in the various forms that they could have, also very in line with the old world definition. But let's bring that up to speed now and look at a PMI aligned model and definition of the charter. It's a document issued by the project initiator or sponsor that formally authorizes the existence of a project, provides the project manager authority to apply organizational resources to project activities. So if we pull the old 13th century definitions into the modern world, that's pretty spot on. That's really applicable to the waterfall and kind of agile-ish project charters that we get, at the beginning of the project. And even Six Sigma uses charters, right? That process improvement. A big difference I'd see in those definitions is Six Sigma kind of looks at a project charter as a living document, and it defines what's the process, what's the improvement. So there's still some crossover, because we're going to talk about processes in kind of really more traditional project management sense, waterfall elements of that. So for me, I have a little more than the Between the Slides, just the 5 today. I've got about 12 key areas, I think, based on charters that I've used before, that I use now, that I've read about, templates I've looked at. And I think pulling all those elements together, if you have these 12 things, and it doesn't have to be a long form charter, but if you have these key elements, I think it'll really set up a project for success early on. So the first thing I think every charter needs and will benefit from is a cover page. And with that cover page, it seems pretty obvious. Some folks may think it's wasteful, but kind of like when I was in the incident management world, the cover page kind of speaks to the work that your team did. So early in a project, right, we're still in initiating. This cover page says, hey, here's a charter. We're going to, give you some information about the project, how we think we're going to do it, what we think the schedule is going to be, a high level. So here's a nice looking page that says the name of the project, the date, the revision, graphics. So I'm a big fan of using organizational graphics, the approved ones. So go through your, channels, your branding and all that kind of stuff. But who's the host agency that's really supporting this project, that owns this project, and put the graphic on the front of it, be proud of that. And then a good option too, I think, is put your partner's logo on there. So there's some politics in logos, right? Whose is bigger, whose is not. If I'm the host agency, my logo is going to be bigger, and I'll put my partners in there. We'll say in partnership with, right? We'll put some verbiage in there, but I think that's very helpful. So when you float the charter around, whether it's a printout that you get hard copy signatures on, or you're emailing this electronically, it's just a good looking compiled document. The second thing is a table of contents. This will just help the document flow. Again, I think it adds that level of professionalism. So you go from a cover page to a table of contents, then we'll get into the meat of the charter. And those are pretty standard things. Most project managers, I hope, or folks getting into it, if you're not already, be familiar with the Microsoft Office suite, particularly Word, Excel, Project, of course. I know there's a lot of other products depending on what you use, but certainly the Office suite, the kind of standards of, let's say, PowerPoint, Excel, and Word, the big ones there. And so inserting a table of contents, there's so many tutorials on YouTube. So if you're not familiar with that, just go ahead and look that up. And Microsoft has good stuff on their websites as well. A third key element is then we're going to get into, we've gotten past the cover page, the table of contents. Let's say we clicked on that hyperlink in our table of contents to this third thing, and that's project information. So who is the sponsor real quick? Who are the business owners? Who's the project or program manager or both? What's the start date of this that we think, and again, it's early, right? So we shouldn't have a ton of concrete dates unless maybe it's a regulatory mandated project or, time sensitive because of funding runs out or something like that. But it's still early, so we're not going to have a fleshed out schedule yet. We're not going to have a fleshed out budget yet. So still some high level stuff. So that's just a very quick who's who. We've come in, we're going, okay, this is the sponsor, this is the PM who I know to go to, or the business owner, and it just right up front can tell us that. Not the whole org chart yet. We'll get that in a few minutes here. So the fourth thing is why this project. Let's throw in there a summary of the business case, not the whole business case, because then we could just show people the business case, but let's put a summary of that. So what is this project for? What was the thing we were trying to fix or make better, or new solution in place for this temporary endeavor that we call a project? And then the other thing we want to have there kind of with that, of this why or how with the project, is objectives or goals. And I've seen both, right? So I've seen goals that are kind of broad. The goal is to improve throughput of a product through a system, or the goal is to reduce wasted time. Whereas an objective would be SMART, right? We've talked about that in previous episodes. So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. So I am a big fan of SMART objectives versus goals. I say that because we can have a certain level of specificity. We've already identified at some point in the past and issues that we've grouped together and made objectives with. And so it's pretty easy early on to kind of pull those together. And when you first put the objectives together and you first get the charter, written down or typed up, it's not going to be final anyway. So you're gonna have some revisions of it. But I would shoot for SMART objectives versus goals. But every organization, does things different. But as long as you have something that everyone knows they're shooting for way early in the process, then I think that's a huge help. The fifth key element, I think, for Project Charter is financials. And there's so much variability where you could just have one big lump sum. You could have it broken down in capital and operating. You could have it broken down for, travel, services, hardware, software, a whole bunch of other, categories. But I think this early, again, we're not going to have a full budget because we haven't fully resourced it and we haven't fully scheduled it. So early on, if we can just have some high level, typically a project costs X amount, or we've been given this amount of money based on past projects, or we got a grant for this amount of money, but have it in there so everybody kind of knows what we're working with, unless it's some sort of sensitive financial information, then I guess you wouldn't want to. But I think it's just good to have visibility and transparency in the charter, because this is what everyone's going to work from very early and what we're going to build on as we go through the project. The sixth element I think that should be in the project charter, every project charter, are measures of success and benefits realization. So how are you going to measure what you're trying to fix or improve, or what's this new process or new product going to make better or slow down if something's going too fast? Which, so have you taken a study ahead of time to say it takes John Doe this long to do this workflow before the project, and then we're going to do the same thing after the project and see if it got faster? So a good rule of thumb that I've learned from one of my project management mentors is to try and grab 30 times for kind of a time study. And that's a good performance improvement standard, meaning I'm going to watch you do that workflow 30 times, and then we're going to watch you do it 30 times again after the new solution or the new workflow or the new process or whatever is in place that we were trying to do with this project. So that's what I would do for sure. And you want to have those targets before, so that you can see if your work really is making a difference along the way, so you can kind of continually be measuring to that. And then at the end, know for sure, did we get better? Did we get worse? And where did we miss the mark? And for kind of benefits realization, similar, but maybe, are we using statements like we want to have a happier workforce, which is super hard to measure because you're using surveys and survey responses are typically pretty low, like 30% or something like that. Versus, true measurements. And I know it's hard to capture data elements for kind of intangibles like customer satisfaction and, again, versus when we're looking at money savings and time savings and workflow efficiencies, we can kind of measure that a little bit more, but you get the gist of it. Somewhere in your charter, have at a high level, here's what we want to make better, and here's how we think we're going to measure it before and after. So, and then 7, this is where we're going to get into the who's who for sure. And so, in the definitions we talked about, somebody at a high level is authorizing this project. So the project manager is going to truly facilitate creation of this chart and maybe even got involved a little earlier. And the reality is, in the books, it says that sponsors put together charters. In reality, they very rarely do. So we're going to be working very closely with the sponsor and with the business owner to help put together a good product. So let's first get the steering committee, right? So this committee, this group of a mix of subject matter experts, high-level decision makers, not too big of a group, I would suggest, that is the group we would go to if the project team, the folks that are doing the work on the project, get stuck, whether it's they're in an impasse on a decision, on money, on schedule, on scope, they just can't work past it. We're going to go to the steering committee and we're going to say, hey, break the tie for us, or, overrule so-and-so or whatever. The other thing is we're going to regularly report to this steering committee. So early on, let's try and define who those people are. Maybe your organization has a standard, right? Who typically is on your steering committee, what positions, what organizations, probably could be project dependent, but, kind of figure that stuff out early on and have at least some sort of placeholder for that. Right under that, we're going to look at the project team. So early on, again, we haven't resourced this with names, perhaps we may have, which is great, but have an org chart, right? Who's the steering committee? Who's the business owner? Who's the project or program manager? How are we going to structure this thing? Functional groups, geographic teams, however you want to do that. I'm a huge fan of the functional group concept, meaning we're going to have a technical group, we're going to have a finance group, we're going to have like clinical subject matter experts, something like that. So we know where all our knowledge base is and how to work together. And again, a picture is invaluable. An org chart spells it out and says who everyone is in the project, who reports to who. And the other thing I would say and highly suggest is not to have 2 different org charts just because maybe you have the primary organization and a vendor. If it's one project, truly, we're all working toward one outcome, I highly recommend one team, one project organizational chart. And that's the verbiage that everyone uses, right? So it's not my team and our team and your team. It's the team, the project team, and reflect that in the image that you make or a graphic that you use in the org chart. I've used PowerPoint and I've used Visio for this. Both work pretty good. Visio is a lot better, honestly, and it looks a little sharper. You can also export it very well for presentations. So that's kind of some tools that I would suggest when you're putting your org chart together. So how are we going to communicate? That's the 8th element that it probably needs to be in there. It doesn't have to be an entire communications management plan, right? Or an entire matrix of every single thing we're going to do, but at a high level, hey, we're going to start off with a weekly call and we're going to update our committee once a month and we're going to, handle incoming questions this way or that way. So it can be 4 or 5 bullets, very quick, very early, and we'll get into an actual communications plan and strategies and rollout down the road. But just to give folks an idea that we're thinking about it. The 9th element and 9th, 10th, and 11th really are pretty standard, and these are kind of those assumptions, constraints, and risks. So for those assumptions, what do we expect, right? What do we expect to happen? We expect everyone to work together. We expect the lights to stay on, those kind of things. It's a good thing to have in there. So again, it kind of level sets everyone because not everybody's going to be on the same page technically or from where the project came from or how projects even work. For a lot of folks, often it's their first project in some capacity. So this information we provide is going to be very helpful to teach them as we go along and work with them and for us to learn from them as well. The constraints, so what could have a negative impact on us? Those triple constraints of scope and cost and schedule. So what are things that can happen? And those typically affect each other. So to the best of our ability, let's forecast as much as we can, what could impact the schedule. Is it a holiday season or summer, or some big festival is going to happen in the same location you're supposed to be doing, something for your project. Money, what's the economy like? Is there, are we drawn down on spending, those kind of things? And then scope, that's a constant, right? And with waterfall stuff, you try and kind of get a handle on scope early and try and hold on to it and keep, cut down on the scope creep. When you get more agile, it's a little more iterative. You're checking scope, over and over again. There's still checkpoints and scrums and things like that, but and then cost, it's a little easier kind of to track that, but still got to pay attention to the labor. Do you have a set amount? Can you ask for more funds and those kind of things? But you want to make sure the constraints are pretty clearly defined early on. And then what are the risks, right? What are we going to accept? What are we going to avoid? What can we exploit to the positive, right? Do we have to transfer any risk to someone else, to one of our partners? How do we mitigate? How do we help risk not happen or lessen the impact to it? And so, those risks are things that we believe can occur, and we may not be able to identify all the risks right up front, but we need to try to as much as possible. And remember, those risks are things we're going to look at and identify before or, early on in the project. And then when we're going in the project, they may become issues, right? So we may identify a risk that actually does become a real issue, or we may identify a risk that never happened, which is best possible scenario. So those are things I would make sure we have in there. Again, it's just good contingency planning, forecasting, kind of level sets the team. And I think the last element, the 12th, that I would try and include in every project charter is a high level schedule, right? And I mean high level to the point of, month to month. In the first month, we're going to try and kick off or get the charter signed in the, between January and February, or March and April, or April and, June, kind of blocks of time, high level blocks of time, to just try and get folks an idea, both ourselves, our sponsor, our business owner, other folks that have, a stake, they're stakeholders in this project, a good idea of, here's about what we think. And again, there's a lot of factors that go into that. What kind of level of effort did you do early? Do you have a comparable project that took X amount of time that you can use? Does your partner vendor come with a schedule that they know because they've done installations like this before? So that's actually very helpful when that happens. But what we want to do is just get that picture and let folks know, hey, we think it's probably going to be this kind of timeline. And as we go along, set the expectation early too, that this is not hammered in stone. So kind of quick run through of some key elements of a project charter that I think are very important. The project charter is critical, I think, and not just the document, but the process and the conversations that you'll have when you're creating the document are really what's critical, because you're going to be able to talk to early on your team members, your sponsor, your business owner, all the key players that you'll be working with for months or even years at a time, depending on how long the project is. And this will really set expectations early so everyone knows who's the team, how are we going to work together, who makes decisions, who doesn't make decisions, how should we talk to each other, and on and on. It's just really important. So kind of a quick rundown, my key elements, there's 12 of them I think that should be in every charter. Cover page, table of contents, project information about who's the sponsor, business owner, and project manager, business case summary, objectives and goals, your financials at whatever level you typically can snapshot those early. What are your measures of success, or how are you going to realize your benefits? Who's who in the project? Who's your steering committee members? Who's on the project team? What's your org chart going to look like? How are we going to communicate generally and how often? What are those assumptions, constraints, and risks? And what's that high-level schedule that we're going to work toward and that we're going to shore up as we get more details? So that's my 2 cents for the price of hitting play on whatever you're listening to this podcast on. So thank you again for stopping by. Again, thanks for all the folks around the world and in the United States that listen, to all my family and friends, everybody out there working the streets, public safety, emergency management, the military, folks in the office getting after it, getting it done. Thank you all very much. I appreciate all that you do, all that you've done for me, and Godspeed.